All right. All right. Well, let's get started for those who did join on time. Let's not make people wait. So, hello everyone. I'm Janet O'Malley. I'm a product marketing manager here at Quest. I'm focused on our solutions for migration. And I want to welcome you to our Tech Talk today, Active Directory Modernization, a journey to a secure and flexible identity infrastructure. That's a long one. I think we'll just call it AD Mod. It's a little easier to remember, and that's kind of what it's about. So before we get started, a couple housekeeping things. As you heard Katie just mention, this is being recorded so that we can make it available on quest.com soon. Please use your chat for any questions you have throughout this. We have two experts, I should say, in the background answering some questions. We have Craig Baldwin and Armando Leo, and they are expert in this area, and they'll catch your questions throughout the presentation, and then we might also touch on some of those at the end. And if there's anything that we want to interrupt our presenters on and ask, and it makes sense, then they'll interject and do that then as well. So with that, let's turn things over to our speakers today, Joe Sharmer and Julian Stefan.
All right. Thank you so much. So introduce myself. My name is Joe Sharmer. I'm a principal solutions architect here at Quest. My area of focus is around AD migrations, AD consolidations, AD modernizations, cloud to cloud stuff. This is kind of what I've been doing for pretty much my whole career, and really trying to help customers look at all this new technology, try to, understand how this stuff is going to, work for them in their environment and how they can start adopting that technology.
Morning, afternoon, everybody. I'm Julian Stefan. I'm one of the principal solutions architects over at Quest Software. So I'm in the professional services organization. So when folks are ready to actually go through an AD modernization project like this, I'm one of the architects that will help a customer, along their journey. So I've got a background in architecture and migrations, going back, 15 plus years. So our group helps our customers with this journey that you've signed up to look at and see where the pitfalls are in the field today.
Yep. And so before we jump into the presentation, a couple things. Between Julian, Armando, Craig, and myself, we have lots of answers. Okay, so if you have any questions at all about this topic, put them in the chat. We'll get them answered for you. We hope that you won't be shy, and try to make this as interactive as we can. So for me, my role is on the pre-sale side. So I help customers, wade through all this technology based on what they are looking to do, whether it's an acquisition, a modernization project, a divestiture. And so we get this unique perspective that a lot of folks don't get, because we get to talk to so many different organizations about their environments. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is talk to you a little bit today about kind of what we see in our customers' environments as they start taking on these types of projects. And the first thing is really that there's a lot of complexity, right, going on within customers' environments. All right. Active Directory has been around forever, right? I mean, it's been around since '99. And the reality is that a lot of people have done a lot of work to maintain their infrastructures, but it's mostly been just maintenance, right? hey, we've got a new acquisition. We got to introduce this new environment. We've got to add this. So there's been a lot of stuff that have been just piled upon, right, their existing infrastructure. And that what we're seeing is that oftentimes most of this new technology, most of these acquisitions, most of these upgrades that are performed are done really quickly, right? We need to get this, and we need to acquire this company and bring them into our fold. But what happens is that you often see a lot of residual things, right, that are left over, that shouldn't be there. I mean, we honestly still see people who are running Server 2003 and still running XP. I just saw a news article this morning on like one of the national news organizations where there are companies that are desperately searching for administrators and developers for Windows 3.11, right? And the reality
Yeah,
of it is,
I
yeah,
saw that article too. Yeah, it was
it's
mind blowing when I saw it.
it's
Yeah.
unbelievable. And it's because it's easier to simply leave what's working in place and not go through the process of updating, modernizing, and reassessing that infrastructure, right? You see things like, password policies are all over the place. OU structures are just a giant mess. Trusts are, everywhere because nobody knows what this trust actually does, and they're afraid to get rid of it because they don't know what the impact's going to be. Um, and that these environments that we're seeing today are going to be problematic. Obviously, ransomware is everywhere. Everybody's concerned about that now, and it's a big concern, right? These organizations are making millions and millions of dollars every year on ransomware, so it's not going to stop. The other thing to keep in mind too is this cloud technology that's coming up, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. It's going to cause an impact to these legacy systems that haven't been maintained. Plus the fact that, people who have been administering Active Directory for the last 25 plus years, right? They know how to manage that Active Directory environment, and that moving to this more modern technology, trying to, adopt all of the Copilot stuff and the AI and Entra ID, it's challenging because it's different, right? So most likely none of this stuff on this slide surprises you. But if you are in one of these environments, just know that it's common, right? It is understandable, and that there are ways to modernize your environment without causing dramatic impact to your end users and your business. All right, Julian, you want to talk about servers and applications?
Sure. So yeah, Joe kind of alluded to it earlier, but I'm sure it's not a surprise that a lot of organizations have some sort of server environment or application that it's critical, and it's it brings in a lot of revenue, or it's the main revenue generator in the business. But when it comes to a the when the IT organization decides, hey, we want to go and make this modernization change or go through this upgrade process, there's always the flags that come up from that could come up from the business that say, don't touch my application, it's working, it's running, it's not worth the risk, I don't have vendor support anymore, this was a homegrown app that we've had for 10, 15, 20 plus years, and there's no technology, there's no something cuts off the shelf that could replace it, or to bring in the amount of developers it might need to modernize that particular app might be worth more than what the risk would be if something were to happen to the app. That's something that we commonly see in the environments today. Something that Joe had also mentioned earlier with some of the skill set needs. I've seen it on in some organizations that go the other way, where there's an organization that they're primarily, cloud-based or cloud-focused. They go and they acquire another organization, and they have a lot of this on-premises infrastructure or technical debt, and they don't have a lot of their administrators and architects are cloud-focused. They don't have the administrators or the experience that have had the 10, 15, 20 plus years experience on Active Directory to say, well, how do I get this technical debt, from on-premises up to my cloud environment? We've also seen that as well. Some of the security concerns that I've seen in customer environments when we've done any sort of migration or application assessments, this should not be a surprise to probably most, would be, any legacy protocols that you might have, whether it's, we still see NTLM v1, which has been around for a very long time, and it's still prevalent and in use. SMB v1, we see a lot of those all the time. With if you have like legacy file shares, for example, then they haven't updated that technology to use adopt OneDrive or some sort of other cloud file share service, but you're still using that because you either don't have the budget or don't have the investment to do so. From a directory standpoint, we've seen applications that have integrated Active Directory in the past. Typically, when you would install some sort of application in an environment in the past, and it's still a little bit relevant today, not as much, but we've seen where you may need over elevated permissions to the directory. And so what happens there is if a service account to a particular application gets compromised, it could lead to a compromise of the directory. Backup and recovery, we're seeing, nowadays it's not enough to just have a if your domain controllers are virtualized, right? It's not enough to just have a snapshot of those or back those up anymore, or just to back up some of the files that you from Active Directory, especially with all the ransomware attacks that you've seen in the news. Um, there's pieces missing in your backup and recovery plan that if you do encounter a ransomware attack, I could say, well, I have 2 levels of backup, but I don't have another granular level of backup, or somewhere a backup saved off site that I could have used to restore my environment in case I run into that attack. And that's it leads into why most customers are looking to the cloud of some sort, whether that's purely going to starting off hybrid and moving some stuff to the cloud and then fully making that investment and modernizing later on, or just having the program and backing to actually start to move it all as part of a large program. Next slide. So the path forward. So when you embark on a modernization program, it's typically in no matter what we see, if it's from a small to a large business, it's usually when you go through a modernization like this, it's a program level that you would kind of see to have all of your stakeholders involved, from your executive level stakeholders, your technical stakeholders, application stakeholders, that need to be involved in some form of fashion to make sure that the programs is a success. But how do you prove that the program, when going through the whole transformation, is a success? You might have different technical stakeholders that say, well, I want to just upgrade my domain controllers to this level of OS or put them in the cloud. My business stakeholders might say, well, I want to make sure that my application and how it integrates with Active Directory is is modernized and updated to fit the needs of the business. I'm looking at trying to exit a data center. If I'm trying to host everything in some cloud provider, trying to exit my data centers to reduce my local infrastructure costs. From a security standpoint, do I have a comprehensive auditing, backup, and recovery solution in place? So you have to look at what your different executive stakeholders are looking at as part of the program and take all of that accordingly when you're actually planning a large program endeavor like this.
Okay, so one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, oh my gosh, right? We've got all this stuff, and we know it needs to be cleaned up, and we know that we have challenges within our infrastructure. What do we do, right? How do we fix this? So we talked a lot about current state and desired end goals, but how do you get there, right? And so the number one question I get asked about this is, what do we do, right? Should we take what we have today, modernize it, right? Patch it, get it cleaned up, try to consolidate, our disparate environments? Should we go greenfield, stand up a new AD forest, right, and move everything into that AD forest? Or should just move to the cloud, right? Let's just, rip the Band-Aid off. Let's get to the cloud. And, the answer is like anything in IT, it depends. The things that we get for organizations when they look at addressing their current infrastructure, it's really a matter of, well, where are the challenges? What have you been doing to maintain your current infrastructure? And is the upgrades and the changes that are needed minor, or are they significant, right? Do you have 20 years of GPOs that you've built over the last, 2 decades that are nested GPOs on nested GPOs on nested GPOs, and you really don't have any idea of what's going on with them? Do you have no group aging policies, right? Where you've got so many security and distribution groups that you don't even know what they do anymore. In most cases, a majority of the customers fall into that category, where they've simply been maintaining their infrastructure and applying the patches that Microsoft pushes out, but haven't really done a lot to really clean up and modernize, right, their policies and their procedures and the way they do work. And so in a lot of cases, my recommendations are to go greenfield, right? Build up a new environment. Because what that's going to allow you to do is sort of take a once in a lifetime opportunity to reassess everything. How do we create groups? How do we age groups? How do we manage and create GPOs and manage GPOs? All of those things, you now have a clean slate. Most people, though, look at a migration to a greenfield environment as very challenging because it's a migration and we've got to move all our people and our laptops and our desktops and our work from home people and our servers and our NAS and SAN devices. They look at that and they look at the amount of work necessary to do that, and they get kind of scared. And that's normal, that's okay. But what's really important to understand is that there are third-party tools out there that can really make that process of migrating into a new Active Directory environment pretty seamless and pretty easy. So just keep that in mind, that moving to a greenfield environment isn't as bad as it sounds. Now, for customers that are looking to the cloud, they're saying, well, we know this is probably going to be, where we want to go. Should we go to the cloud? Well, it depends. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But just understand that for myself and the organizations that I speak with, most are starting to adopt hybrid cloud technology, right, where they're connected both on-prem and to the cloud, as opposed to moving entirely to the cloud. Okay, so again, understand that your options are all valid, that if you need to maintain your existing infrastructure and just modernize it, that's perfectly fine. We see this mostly with organizations that have a lot of legacy applications, right? That just, the people who wrote them or the organizations that built these products may not exist anymore. There's no support, and trying to move them into a new forest becomes a little bit challenging. But here's the thing that's really important, right, is that making any decision has to be done after, right, you do a very detailed discovery of your environment. You have to know what you have in order to be able to make a decision about what's going to be best for your company. right? You need to know, your GPO infrastructure. You need to know how your OUs are created. You need to know about the trusts, right, that you have with external identities and how those trusts are being used, right? You need to know about all of those things before you can even make a determination as to what's going to be the best path forward for you, right? So again, the idea is that start with this detailed analysis of your environment, have an understanding of what you have in your environment, and then start looking at what your options are. Okay. So let's talk about the cloud, right? Let's talk about Azure, Entra, and let's talk about what we're seeing from our customers' perspective. Okay. Almost all of them, almost all of them are moving in that direction, right? You can see this little survey up in the top right corner. 94% of our customers are looking at, introducing cloud technologies, moving to Entra, whether it's completely or hybrid. Okay. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but the biggest one is it's just coming from Microsoft, right? When you start looking at all of the things that Microsoft is doing, and the new technologies that Microsoft is introducing, a lot of them are sort of cloud centric, right? They are, you know, really pushing Entra ID, and they're really pushing the cloud technologies like Copilot, Security Copilot, Word Copilot, right? All of these things are, generally looking to be Intune managed, right? So if you're on-prem only and you have nothing up in the cloud, your ability to adopt this new technology is going to be very limited, right? And Windows 12 is coming out here in next month, I think, right? And the idea is that, again, there is going to be a ton of hooks into that operating system to connect up into Entra. So again, there's a lot of compelling reasons why organizations are looking at this, and the reality is that you have to look 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the road as you're starting to, look at your infrastructure. So again, understand that this is the path that Microsoft is going down, and that we need to make sure that your organization is ready to adopt that new technology, and make sure that you're ready to meet those needs and the push that Microsoft is going to have. Okay. The challenge is, again, it's different, right? You got these folks that have been doing Active Directory management for 20 years, right? And they know GPOs, and they know, right, how to manage on-prem AD, but do they know how to set up GPO policies or Intune policies? Right? It's very different way of dealing with devices, right? And joining devices up to the cloud. So again, understand that it's going to require a new skill set for folks, and it's not something you could just pick up a book and start reading and know everything. It's going to take practice. And so again, you're going to want to start looking at this sooner than later, to get your staff knowledgeable up into these cloud technologies. And again, I want to highlight this. There are third-party tools that can make these processes much easier when you start adopting these cloud technologies. Okay. So again, when you start stepping back and say, all right, let's look at the cloud, let's look at Entra and how we can get there. One of the challenges is, dealing with applications. I got all these applications on-prem. We had Susan in development wrote this really cool app that everybody uses, right? It's on-prem, but Susan left the company, and we don't know where the source code is, and we don't know what's in there. What do you do with that, right? How do you manage that type of application, right? Understand that that's common. Everybody has those, right? And that there are solutions to address those types of scenarios as you start adopting cloud technology, right? I mean, there's things like Azure Active Directory directory services, right, where you can now start having your DCs up in the cloud, right? You could start connecting your application servers to those DCs, right? Or actually move servers up there, right? So again, the point of it being is just that there are technologies that will help you get to that end goal. Another one that is really impactful, right, to your end users is if you were to try to move your desktops and laptops and the work from home people and try to get them Entra only joined, right? Microsoft says use autopilot. That's great. You know, the problem with autopilot is that it's basically wiping the device and reinstalling an operating system. And so that's okay if you're prepared for that. If you're doing this through attrition, you've got a small organization, you know, you got 100 workstations, right? 100 users, not such a big deal. You know, we talk to organizations that have 100,000 users, right? And imagine going to 100,000 users and saying, we're going to wipe your device. It's okay. We're just going to get rid of everything and all your data and pictures of Fluffy the cat that you have in the background. That's okay. No worries. That ain't going to work, right? That's going to be so disruptive to your business. So understand that, you know, moving your devices to Entra, right, can be really challenging if you go down that autopilot route. And again, there are third-party apps, right, to help with that and maintain your end users' data and the profiles and the pictures of Fluffy the cat, right? So again, just keep that in mind that autopilot isn't your only option for adopting an Entra-only joined device, okay? The other thing that's really important is that GPOs are different. There are no GPOs up in the cloud. None. They don't exist. Right? So when you start looking at moving to Entra, understand that, you know, based on that discovery that you've done, right, that comprehensive discovery you've done of your environment, you now know all of your GPOs, you now know what they all do, and they all need to be transferred over into Intune policies, okay? So again, you know, these are steps, right, that you need to take in order to move solely up into the cloud. Okay. Obviously, you know, you're going to do different things from a backup and recovery plans, right? There's going to be different things that need to be accommodated for that. And then again, you know, going into this, you know, we see more people adopting a hybrid approach to dealing with desktops, then we see people moving entirely to Entra only. And that's because it's easier, right? And it gives you a lot of the benefit, like using Intune to manage your devices. So again, the whole idea here is that there are options for you to start adopting this technology that won't necessarily be as disruptive as it would be with, you know, kind of just throwing caution to the wind and moving entirely up to the cloud. So again, the idea here is that adopting a hybrid model is perfectly fine and is honestly oftentimes better for the customers, especially for organizations where you don't have that level of knowledge, right, that you might need to manage your entire infrastructure in the cloud. Because again, we have folks that are very good at managing your M365 environment, Mail, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, Power Apps, all that stuff. But once you start talking about using Entra to manage your devices and your security policies, it requires a really different level of security or of knowledge, I should say. So again, just keep all this in mind, right? That this is normal. This is what people tend to go through and need to go through before making any decisions about what's going to be best for your particular organization. All right, so let's talk about security. Julian, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, so this has been my area that I've been focusing on for quite the past while. So a lot of what Joe has talked about earlier, and you kind of saw it in the title. So when we say secure and flexible, Joe kind of talked about the options as far as what we're looking at as far as what to assess, how to go about doing it, making your infrastructure flexible. Kind of the next section goes into, depending on what we pick, how do you make your environment secure. So this slide here goes over, over the years, Microsoft has recommended different models of security when it comes to protecting the directory. So, starting from 99, as Joe kind of mentioned, when Active Directory was kind of born, all we really looked into is what the user would do, what the corporate policy was, what available tasks were available, and kind of use that least privilege kind of model. So that was kind of the forefront of security in Active Directory for a long time. Then it evolved into the tiering model that you kind of see in 2012 with tier 0, tier 1, and tier 2 assets. So your tier 0, if for those who are not familiar with tier 0, is kind of what it alludes to today. Is tier 0 is any asset within the directory that's critical to the directory itself, where if that asset were to be compromised, whether that's a domain controller, GPO, any account that's part of your domain or enterprise admins group, any of those kind of things that would be compromised, would consider that a tier 0 asset. When you look at tier 1, you're looking at your certain application servers and management servers, and tier 2 is anything local to the workstation or client level. So to address that, in 2014, Microsoft had recommended the model of they called it the ESAE, or most in the industry called it the Red Forest model, but it was very difficult to implement and maintain unless you kind of had the backing from both your technical administrators and your security administrators to actually adhere to those guidelines, because anything outside of those guidelines and kind of your permissioning model would be compromised. So that was kind of the recommendation over in the mid 2010s, and then in 2020, and what's led to today is Microsoft revamped that with all the cloud services and all the hybrid cloud technologies that have been coming out into the market, and their current recommended access model is called the enterprise access model. So next slide. So what this looks at is, so originally, obviously, before any cloud services or cloud providers were out there, the original tiering models that Microsoft had recommended over the years were just scoped to maintain privilege escalation for your on-premises directory. So with all the cloud services and technologies now, Microsoft made a change in recommendation in how they would adhere and adopt to protecting those cloud services and cloud assets. So with tier 0 now is known as the control plane. So like I said, any of these assets, whether it's on premises or in the cloud, that could potentially be compromised. And when we think of Entra ID, we would consider any potential privileged accounts or service accounts that might be in privileged groups in Entra that could potentially be compromised, or any domain controllers you might actually have in Azure if you've started on that journey already and somehow those were compromised by some sort of attack that could be compromised. They would also include that in the whole entire control plane. In the management plane, we're looking at any of your application cloud services that can be hosted, any of your cloud providers, or the data that's actually hosted within those kinds of microservices as well, when you look at it from a cloud standpoint. The tier 2 side now accounts for any of your typical B2B or B2C guest scenarios, as far as if you're if an organization has two tenants and you have guest accounts that you might use to access one tenant, but your primary services are hosted in another tenant, or if you're in a B2C scenario where you provide services, to particular customers and how that is all managed, and any access to any applications to reduce the attack surface of any of your APIs being compromised.
So, Julian, let me ask you a question. Looking at the enterprise access model, how easy would it be to adopt this model in an existing environment?
So, in an existing environment, it depending on the complexity of your environment, it can be kind of challenging. I think that's where the assessment that you kind of mentioned earlier. I think that's kind of the key approach. That's the first thing that you have to do is assess what you have and see where where weakness points are. Do I have my, do I have my services? Do I have, you know, accounts in my, things that we would look at in an assessment would be, do I have accounts in my domain or enterprise admins group that, depending on how I do my changes in the directory, is that the right way of doing things? Is it best practice or not? Do I have do I have a password management solution that can go and rotate those particular accounts? Am I using something like if I don't have a third party tool, am I using native laps that you can use within Windows as long as you're using 2016 and higher? You look at different scenarios like that. Typically in environments that have been around for 15, 20 plus years that have had um, you know AD around for just quite a long time, you know, more times than not, you've seen that, based off of the acquisitions, mergers that have happened over time, where some customers we see they do it right. They integrate, they'll integrate the environment in, and then they'll actually go and adopt the policies that that the corporate acquirer might be using for best practices. We've also seen it the other way, where you just you get the network up and say, okay, well, you're part of the family now, and then it leads into almost like like a shadow IT kind of scenario, where you have your administrators on this side of the house doing you know activities on how they used to do things before, but it's not what the acquiring organization does too. So that's kind of where the assessment comes into to kind of see, am I able to do this in an existing environment or not? More times than not, and just from the professional services side and any assessments that the organization that we've done, we've typically recommended, as you kind of said earlier, kind of going the greenfield approach, just because there's all that debt and history that it's gone on over time. Unless you've had the backing from both technical and executive to go make the modern and security changes over time, more times than not, it's added on and added on, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I see too, and that's why more often than not, moving to greenfield environment is just more efficient and more effective.
So the term from any assessments in security that we've kind of seen that executives have kind of used uh, in key phrases is the term that has come up over the years is uh, blast radius. So when we talk about blast radius, and this is kind of a key that was or a term that was keyed from from some folks who might have control of AD in their enterprise that may have a security background. They look at, well, what's my blast radius? So when we look at blast radius from a modernization project, a modernization migration project, we look at I'll use an example, right? I have say I'm going to go to a greenfield. Okay, I'm going to go to a greenfield directory, and I've got 10 domains in forest that I need to consolidate into potentially, one single domain in forest, or maybe two, depending on what the business need is, right? So depending on how, some network and security, implementations that are currently in some customer environments, I've seen in the field, security by obscurity, right? My network is set up this way so that I, even if I wanted to compromise this environment, this part of the directory, I can't, because I physically can't get there. Well, yeah, that's a way of doing it, but is it the right way of doing it, or is it the productive way of doing it? No, not really. Okay. But the big question kind of is, from what we've seen in business case proposals and things that customers have developed, or what we've developed and helped them with, is, well, if I'm consolidating these directories, if I do have some sort of compromise to the directory, if I have it consolidated, then potentially more of my business units could be potentially compromised, because it's a consolidated directory, right? It's pure math, right? So yes, that is something that is of a concern. So, when you look at the blast radius, so that the definition that we've kind of coined in term is just your overall impact of a security incident to your directory. And that could be any kind of incident, right? Whether that's an administrator making some sort of change that they weren't supposed to, that takes down an application or takes down authentication services. If you have a ransomware attack, that compromises some of your domain controllers and could potentially compromise some GPO or some of the DIT files that actually control replication active directory. Those are certain kinds of examples, right? Um, Flattening and looking at both consolidation or a greenfield, depending on what you do actually choose after your assessment, both will contain the same amount of potential impact. Flattening your directory as is one of the key ways to reducing the attack surface. So, flattening a directory when you go to a greenfield, it's one of the pillars of the defense in depth model. So, using the defense in depth model is the best way to handle your blast radius concerns. So, it's a strategy that we've helped recommend as far as the professional services organization to help with customers if we're helping them with designing a greenfield, or if they're designing a greenfield on their own and they're looking for just some advice from the professional services organization. So it's multiple layers that are designed to slow down and reduce slow down and reduce the blast radius. So if an attack does happen, you have multiple lines of defense, and reduces your potential risk of your security or ransomware incidents. So on the next slide, kind of gives a visual on just an example, just some examples on what we're talking about when we look at defense in depth. So in looking at this guide here, kind of looking at the tiers of defense, just starting from looking at your top to bottom. So things that you can implement in your environment would be permission whitelisting for any of your GPOs, and just permissions to the directory itself, having those things in place, using dynamic groups of membership for certain changes that you might need to make to Active Directory, having a PAM system in place, so having some sort of third party PAM system or Windows Labs to help protect and rotate the passwords on accounts, or having a process if you have like the third party services that can integrate with some of the service desk tools. I've seen in organizations where they may put in a change that says, hey, I need a 4-hour window to go make this schema change or attribute level change, or some form of change in the Active Directory, and I need these high level privileged accounts to be able to do it. If you have the integrations in place, I've seen it where once the change is approved, you with your PAM system in place, you can have the account checked out for access, and as soon as you go and make the change and close that change, it checks the account back into your PAM, or rotates the password in Labs, right? So there's multiple different integration scenarios of how you can control that from just the managing your privileged accounts. Looking at the logical segregation, so that's kind of what we've been talking about earlier, a lot of moving to that greenfield or consolidate to an existing directory. That logical separation of how you would go about doing that falls under that pillar. And your access auditing and disaster recovery, so having solutions in place that says, if I'm going to make a change with this privileged account, I need to know who was making this change, at what particular time it was making this change. Does this, having that access auditing will help to look at and see, was this account supposed to make this change at this particular time frame or not? I've been part of incidents in the past where the customer found out that they were actually under a ransomware attack because they at least had the access auditing in place to kind of say, oh, I see these accounts were added to the domain admin, enterprise admin groups. We're making these changes at some off time in the middle of the night, and there wasn't a production change going on. We know we're actually under some form of attack. So that's very key. With your disaster recovery, making sure you have a proper disaster recovery plan in place, and having the tools to recover from any form of directory, whether that's as far as as granular as being able to recover an attribute that was overwritten, to recovering a domain controller that was potentially compromised, or your entire directory if all of the domain controllers are compromised under some form of ransomware attack, and having those backups in a in cloud storage where it's secure and only certain individuals have access to that secure storage to be able to retrieve those backups from. Having having a comprehensive backup solution in place. Those types of examples in this defense in depth model help to greatly reduce the risk of, if you were to have a incident, reduce the risk of having one altogether. But if you do, having the proper controls in place to reduce the amount of time that you might have some form of downtime.
All right. Wow. That was a lot. Thank you, Julie. So I think, the thing for everybody to kind of take away from this is, the things that Julie and we're talking about those are things that you need in place today, right? All of that security, all of those security models, those are things that you really want to be in place in your environment today to protect your organization from ransomware, to protect from outside attacks, but that trying to introduce these new security models in old aging Active Directory infrastructures, it's hard, right? And so understanding that Active Directory modernization is something that's going to take some work, but that in the end, right? In the end, it's going to build and allow your infrastructure to continue to grow, 5-10 years down the road, and also maintain the security of your data and your infrastructure itself. So again, remember that start with an assessment. Start looking at what you have in your environment today, getting a good inventory of what you have, what it does, how you have connectivity into other organizations and things like that has to be done first. Because again, trying to make decisions about what model is going to be best and what approach is going to be best, are we going to go hybrid, are we going to go cloud only? You can't make those decisions without having that real good understanding of what you have today. The other thing that's really important to understand is that there are third-party applications that can really make a lot of these things much simpler and much easier. We talked about autopilot, right? And how disruptive using autopilot can be when you're trying to move, for example, workstations up into the cloud for your entire organization. There are tools that can really help make that whole process simple and easy without having to wipe your devices. So again, leverage those third-party apps to make your modernization project as easy as possible. Okay, so thank you very much. We appreciate everything that you've all the questions that you've asked. I think that the next tech talk is coming up here. And that's going to be Becky Cross. She's going to be talking about preparing for a transition, right, from on-prem AD into Azure and Entra. Right. So again, please, go to her talk. She's got a lot of really great information. I guess Craig and Armando, do we have any questions, or Janet?
I think there was one, that was going to be held to the end.
There was one question that came up back when you were presenting on kind of the move to Entra ID, right, Joe? And that question was, is there a minimum size from a company perspective, a number of employees standpoint, where doing that would be cost effective? My answer was, it depends, right? So, but I figure you might have a little bit more color you could provide.
Also, there. Joe, maybe some color around Greenfield as well. I think that may have also come in when you were talking about going to a Greenfield environment, but both are applicable.
Okay, so size makes no difference. The reality of it is, I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and some of the most complex projects I've worked on have been 300 seat migrations, right? Yeah. As opposed to, as opposed to, 150, 200,000 seat migrations, right? Some of the smaller ones can be much more complex, and it's simply a matter of, what do you have today to, that's that you need to address as part of that migration. What I can tell you is, generally speaking, the smaller the organization, the easier the transition. Because for the most part, small organizations, they don't have 150 homegrown applications that are sitting on-prem, right, that you're going to have to address as part of that migration. These are going to be, you got one or two, they're mostly off the shelf solutions, and it becomes pretty easy. The thing that is most important, right, isn't necessarily size, or even complexity. It's about making sure that the people that you have working on the project and that will be administering the project have the knowledge to maintain it, right? Because again, if you're moving from on-prem into Entra, you're going to have to know how to deal with Intune policies and create them and manage them. You're going to need to know how to, deal with hardware, right, in Entra. And so again, these things are just different. And so long as you have the skill sets to be able to manage those things on an ongoing basis, right, then your project should be successful. But we see so often where, yeah, we want to move to the cloud, and how do we migrate our GPOs to Intune? We don't know, right? There is no real GPO to Intune migration path, right? Because it's apples to oranges. And so again, making sure that you have the knowledge, right, is going to be the most important factor in your project. And then going back to Greenfield, real briefly. So I think most of you have kind of gotten the hints that Julie and I have kind of pushed, is that going Greenfield tends to be the least disruptive way of adopting this new modern, security methods, new modern technologies, because you don't have to deal with all of that legacy stuff, right? That's been sitting around for 20 years, and that it is daunting at first because you're looking at this as a migration more so than a modernization project. But in the end, right, your end infrastructure is going to be much more secure, much safer, and much easier to manage. I don't know, Julian, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So like the analogy I would have to that is, you buy a new pair of shoes and you're using a shoehorn to try to fit your foot into that new shoe, right? Or trying to fit something into, like, jamming like a screw, just trying to take the peg hole with the screw and trying to drive the hammer to fit that through. It's that most times it's if you're taking the approach of, I'm adopting this new way of doing things, because when you go through modernization like this, a lot of your administration changes, a lot of what you want to do, a lot of that requires policy change too, like in how people actually work and do things. It's from that mindset, it's easier to comprehend that if you're going to a new environment. One thing I've seen from cost measures, just from the security point of view, is what is your risk tolerance for what you currently have in your environment. So, in looking at your assessment, one thing you look at is, what security gaps do I have? What is my risk tolerance based off of what I've assessed, to say, is this a priority 3, that if this particular thing happens, I'm not as concerned, or if this is a priority 1, siren the horns, that if this happens based off of this gap that I've seen, my potential environment could go down too. Some organizations have gone with the model of using that, but also, if my Active Directory does go down, what's my cost per hour if my directory does go down, right? So if my directory goes down for 4 to 6 hours, what's that cost to my business? From a business case justification, we've seen a lot of organizations, especially from the security risk and ransomware with everything going on these days, we've seen a lot of customers use that as just one of the business drivers of when putting together that business case and looking at the cost of it too.
And, for those folks that are interested in the cloud at all, I highly recommend that you go to Becky's talk. She's going to talk a lot about the details associated with, taking your on-prem AD environment and moving it up into the cloud. Really, really insightful. And there's a ton of really great information in her presentation. All right. Well,
All right, is that the end of our questions? So let me jump in here. If you enjoyed the level of information from today and found it helpful, you might want to look at joining us for an in-person tech event. It is going to be in Dallas this coming October 1st and 2nd. This past one, 2023's, was in Atlanta. Just a nice size event. It's a great way to get access to different speakers and experts, MVPs, Microsoft folks who present, and just a good opportunity to network with your peers and people doing similar work to you. So there in the chat is the link for registering for that if you're interested. And with that, I think we are done. We have all the Q&A wrapped up. We want to thank you for joining us today. As Katie mentioned, we're recording this, and it will be available. I saw a question in the chat about the timing. In the upcoming week, it will be available on the Quest website, but it will also be sent out as a recording to attendees. So you can look forward to that. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.